This episode is brought to you by Claude by Anthropic. Claude is the AI for minds that don't stop at good enough. It's the collaborator that actually understands your entire workflow and thinks with you. Whether you're debugging code at midnight or strategizing your next business move, Claude extends your thinking to tackle the problems that matter and finds connections you might have missed. For problems worth solving, get started at claude.ai/Spotify.
I've been in this library for 6 hours. I'm out of snacks and energy. Plus, I just realized I forgot to put deodorant on.
Oh, girl, you're a mess. Let's run to Target.
Let's RTT.
We'll grab some protein chips, body spray, and deodorant.
And we get 20% off with Target Circle so we can get those great face masks for our self-care Sundays.
I love an SCS.
Let's get out of here.
College students get 20% off their next purchase with Target Circle. Subject to terms. Visit target.com/circle for more details.
To teach white allies how to regulate when their white identity causes them stress. What is she talking
about? The state
about?
of Kentucky tells you that we've got to raise taxes because we've got to make sure education is funded properly. The first response should be, we can take money from that, right? Because why on earth would federal taxpayers, and as you know, Louisville gets a lot of federal tax dollars and certainly a ton of state money, why on earth should taxpayers be forced to fund this nonsense?
And welcome everybody to the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Joining us, we have Adam from Accuracy and Media joining us again. Adam, thank you so much for hopping on with me here. We have a new video from Accuracy and Media dealing with issues here in Kentucky. Before I play, I've got like a 2-minute clip from the video I was going to play. Could you, for Kentuckians, kind of set up what we're about to watch and see? It's somewhat hard to hear, but I'll ask you some questions afterwards, of course, too. But could you set up and just kind of let us know what are we about to watch here?
Our hidden camera investigative journalist attended the annual conference of the American Psychological Association. This is their version of the American Medical Association or the American Diabetes Association. It's a serious professional organization with, I think, 180,000 members, a budget of $150 million annually. You'd think their conference would be focused on training better mental health professionals. Instead, they are madly obsessed with radical DEI. And one in this video, one in a subsequent video, two of the radicals who were selected to speak about using psychological tactics to push DEI are from the University of Louisville.
Yeah, you'd mentioned something about a color lab at
Yes.
University of Louisville. What is that? Are they like artists? Is that like a painting class? What are you talking about here at the color lab? Is that like a required class for if you're in the art department? What is it?
So this isn't just one class. This isn't just one professor. There's an entire department in the hard sciences division of the University of Louisville called the Color Lab about understanding the conditions and legacies of racism. And at the University of Louisville, they consider that a hard science. They put it in the same building with like biolabs and similar things. I don't know how that's possible in a state that has a ban on DEI, that they have an entire lab devoted to it, but your tax dollars are paying for Dr. Yara Mekawi from the Color Lab to travel to the American Psychological Association conference and explain how psychologists should use cognitive behavioral therapy, a tactic that was created for people who have depression, anxiety, to make better white allies and make sure that they can decenter their whiteness. She also talks about using dialectical behavioral therapy, which is something they created for people on the spectrum. She talks about using that in the fight for anti-racism. You know, these are vulnerable people who seek psychological care. And instead of having them help you work through trauma, having them instead prioritize making you a better white ally is disgusting and immoral.
So let's take a look here. This is 2 minutes from what you guys have here. There's a fuller 4-minute video that has a lot of this. I wanted to start though where somebody actually from, the University of Louisville. I mean, obviously, Adam, this is a Kentucky-centric show. When you guys send over things, it's always when it's about Kentucky. So I appreciate it. You've picked up on, I won't cover just anything anywhere. So I wanted to start where this professor from Kentucky, she's paid for by the tax dollars here of Kentucky. Your money, my money. Well, not your money. Well, maybe your money. I don't know how much federal funding there is. But for those of you listening, your money and my money are paying this lady's salary to do this incredibly important work. Let's go ahead and take a listen to what she has to say here.
There are ways for white allies to speak up and use their voice loudly in the service of speaking out against racial injustice, while at the same time taking the lead of BIPOC and still, therefore, staying in their lane and not censoring themselves. Both of these things can be true at the same time. It's a dialectic, one of the core ideas of dialectical behavior therapy. In fact, one of our first trainings for white allies is called Step Up, Step Back, where we use the skills from DBT to teach white allies how to balance this dialectic. In addition to DBT, it would be helpful to draw on other therapeutic modalities such as ACT, motivational interviewing, CBT, and mindfulness to help white allies overcome the various barriers that are a part of their allyship journey. Well, we knew that allies couldn't just use any old mindfulness or any old stress tolerance skill because the emotions they were experiencing were unique. They were group-level emotions, meaning they were emotions that were being activated by their racial group membership. To teach white allies how to regulate the anxiety that gets activated when their white racial identity is brought to the fore. And clear skill uses the principles of motivational interviewing to help white allies overcome ambivalence in their anti-racist commitment. And we compiled all of these skills into a book, which we call Beyond Fragility.
At Accuracy in Media, we've exposed divisive DEI initiatives in schools and universities across the country.
So, Adam, I have many questions. I don't know if you're going to be able to answer them all because this is some cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs kind of stuff. But first, I think we need to take a moment to reflect. After watching that, I feel inspired to reflect. Do you feel stress over being white?
You know, imagine you pay $300 an hour to see a psychologist, and the first thing she tells you is not to center yourself. It's crazy.
Look,
sorry.
We don't need to go down the road of whether or not, talk therapy and talking about your problems all the time is necessarily super helpful to a lot of mental health issues, but we'll put that to the side for a second. In there, she said to teach white allies how to regulate when their white identity causes them stress. What is she talking
about? The state
of
Kentucky tells you that we've got to raise taxes because we've got to make sure education is funded properly, the first response should be, we could take money from that, right? Because why on earth would federal taxpayers, and as you know, Louisville gets a lot of federal tax dollars and certainly a ton of state money, why on earth should taxpayers be forced to fund this nonsense? It's bad enough that it exists because I think it is inherently immoral and dangerous. These people look at psychological tactics that were used to develop, that were developed for use on people in need, people struggling with tragedy and trauma in their life. They see those tactics not as tools to help people in need, but as tools to push a divisive, radical ideology. These are sick people. These are people, I don't want to diagnose them, who might need some mental health care on their own. It's bad enough for something like that to occur in society. It's a whole other thing for us to be forced to fund it with our tax dollars, and yet another thing still for this to occur in a state where we're told that DEI has been banned from higher education.
This isn't, correct me if I'm wrong, Adam, this isn't a DEI conference. This was a psychological APA. Was that American Psychological Association? Is that what it is?
That's it. That's exactly
okay.
it.
I was just guessing. I mean, we can figure out what all these letters mean eventually, just by looking. And so I guess what's confusing to me is why would this even be a topic? Like, it almost feels like a solution in search of a problem. How many people are actually going, like, sitting there and saying, you know what, I need to see a therapist because I feel I want to be a better white ally. I want to stay in my lane. My white skin is causing me stress. Therefore, I need to go ahead and go to a therapist to feel better about that. First, what the most self-serving thing in the world, that sounds like your life is about you for sure. But
Yes.
I mean, what even prompts this conversation to begin with?
Well, it doesn't need prompting because the whole premise of the DEI crowd is to embed it in everything that they do. It's not about having a DEI course per se, but rather viewing everything through the prism of DEI. As we've seen in K through 12 education, that includes math class. That means when you're looking at algebraic equations, your second grade teacher or fifth grade teacher or whatever math level of math you're at will have a discussion about race in math class and why some people might be better at solving mathematical equations than people with a different skin tone, which happens in the state of Kentucky. So, of course, if they're going to view math through a prism of DEI, they're going to view psychology through a prism of DEI. So you could be seeing a psychologist for any kind of problem, and their solution will be through the prism of DEI. Because one of the ways I kind of look at it is that in a world in which so many people have abandoned traditional religion, this has taken its place. We all know plenty of people who view everything through a prism of Judeo-Christian religion. Things happen, because they're God's will, even if it's not a theological discussion per se. That's how they view DEI. It's their religion. It's a prism through which they view everything. And the tremendous danger is that it's going to have the same effect in the medical field that it had on education. We spend more money per pupil than ever before, even adjusted for inflation, yet education scores are lower than they've ever been. In New York City, they spend $40,000 a student annually, and I think about half the kids aren't proficient at reading at grade level. DEI and politics have destroyed the field of education, and now they're trying to do the exact same thing with healthcare.
This episode is brought to you by Claude by Anthropic. Claude is the AI for minds that don't stop at good enough. It's the collaborator that actually understands your entire workflow and thinks with you. Whether you're debugging code at midnight or strategizing your next business move, Claude extends your thinking to tackle the problems that matter and finds connections you might have missed. For problems worth solving, get started at claude.ai/Spotify.
I've been in this library for 6 hours. I'm out of snacks and energy. Plus, I just realized I forgot to put deodorant on.
Oh, girl, you're a mess. Let's run to Target.
Let's RTT.
We'll grab some protein chips, body spray, and deodorant.
And we get 20% off with Target Circle so we can get those great face masks for our self-care Sundays.
I love an SCS.
Let's get out of here.
College students get 20% off their next purchase with Target Circle. Subject to terms. Visit target.com/circle for more details.
They used a term a few times, and I'm not trying to sound crazy, but I'm going to say it. Motivational interviewing. That sounds like a euphemism for brainwashing. That's just what it sounds like. Like if I was sitting down, the government's like, so in psychology, we do something called motivational interviewing. I'd be like, oh, that's MK Ultra type stuff. Like, what are you talking about? Right. But
don't take the
I
LSD
don't know, maybe
from Yara Mekawi.
Yeah. I'm like, are you like, so my first question is motivational interviewing, is that brainwashing or is it means something else that I don't understand?
It's hard to say. And a lot of times as well, it's hard to say their specific goals and motivations with these tactics. Do they mean, for example, to use these tactics in your everyday life to make better allies, use psychological tactics when you're talking to somebody at Walmart or Target? Or do they mean use these specifically in the field of psychology? It's hard to say. But anytime someone's talking about using psychological tactics to advance their political beliefs, I don't care what the political beliefs are. That's wrong. That's weird and immoral and twisted. Yeah, as you said, it sounds like MK Ultra type stuff. I'd like to think that if I wanted to persuade people to join my ideological viewpoint, I would use logic and facts directly related to the political discussion we were having. I wouldn't use psychological tactics. That would be twisted. That would be manipulative. And what's terrifying, again, is These are the leading manipulators in the world. You know, it's the largest psychological organization on the planet, 180,000 members, and they're taken seriously. The sponsors of this conference include OpenAI, the American Diabetes Association. They even include the Department of Justice. Yeah, the same people who are currently investigating Arizona State because of our videos, the same people investigating Ohio State, other universities, partially in response to our videos, are funding this conference. We're funding Yara Mekawi at Louisville, and we're funding this conference through the Department of Justice.
So if basically, and you're right, when we come into the world of psychology and you start talking about, you know, they're using terms like move them beyond white fragility and how to deal with your whiteness and everything else. I mean, we are getting into the realm of essentially brainwashing I mean, that's part of the reason why, you know, sometimes some of these therapy and everything else can be so dangerous, is because it can, you know, you're in there, you're vulnerable. They're talking to you through your thoughts and shaping how you think. It almost sounds like they're trying to manufacture racists.
This is what people, oh, sorry.
Isn't that kind of like, shouldn't that be the opposite of what they're trying to do?
Well, let's remember, these are the people who wholly reject Martin Luther King's dream of a colorblind society. They don't care about the content of your character. They only want to judge you based on the color of your skin. That's the defining thing to them. That determines whether you're an oppressor or oppressed, regardless of what you've done in your life, how noble or reprehensible you've been. These are folks who don't believe in equality. They only believe in equity, which is directly in conflict with equality. These are people who have views that are entirely at odds with the principles that our nation was founded upon. These are views that were largely created by Marxists. That's not to say that everybody who signs on to DEI is a commie, but these are Marxist-based ideological beliefs. And the notion of using psychological tactics to advance Marxism sounds like some kind of deep project that didn't get enough funding under Khrushchev in the 50s. It doesn't sound like something you and I would have to fund with our own tax dollars at the state level, at the federal level, and via the Department of Justice in 2026 America. But that's exactly what it's doing. And I know you mentioned we released a second video from that showing a second professor, also from the University of Louisville, talking about the same thing. And it's not just one rogue professor, it's multiple. It's not just an entry-level staffer. Dr. Yara Mekawi, as we mentioned, runs an entire department at the University of Louisville. So when the presidents of these universities and the provosts claim not to know about such things, that's one rogue employee. Well, if you don't know about what an entire department is doing, I don't think you're very adept at running a university.
We'll circle back to that here in a second. One thing I do wonder about is when they sit there and they say, you know, white allies in therapy deal with Black, Indigenous people. Of course, they use BIPOC, which, I mean, who's, you know, all these things. Anyways, Black, Indigenous
people
of color. Yeah, that's what they're talking about. White allies deal with that. You know, it just comes across to me like they watched American History X once, and they're like, I want to be that Black guy in prison that turned that Nazi from being a Nazi. It's like they watch that and they're like, we can do this. And you know, just some of their other quotes here. Teach white allies to stay in their lane. Teach them how to regulate their white identities when it causes them stress. They use this term beyond fragility. Now, this is a callback to what's her name? You know, got exposed by Matt Walsh for just being completely full of it.
The white fragility author.
Point is it seems like they're calling back to the author of the white fragility with this beyond fragility thing. I don't even understand what they're hitting upon here. I don't even understand what their goals are. Like, what is their endpoint of this where they've said, okay, this is success? What does a white person who's just starting out their ally journey look like compared to what does a white person at the end of their ally journey that's like Yoda, ready to teach young racist Skywalker how to not be racist anymore?
Ironically, I think their ideal white person is incredibly depressed, feels incredible guilt and shame for their skin color, makes sure not to center themselves in the fight, and lets others take the lead. Heaven forbid there be a smart or well-spoken or intelligent white person. I really think we should judge people based on their thoughts and based on the things they have to convey rather than their skin color. And a lot of people, she mentions anti-racism.
You know what's funny though about that?
Yeah.
Real quick. So I believe, yeah, I agree with what you're saying. What they're saying there is white people shouldn't be at the center of the fight. Let Black, Indigenous people of color take the lead. But then at the same time, one of the things I've heard these people say is that it causes minority stress to have to take the lead on it, and it causes them stress to have to teach white people about themselves. And so even within their own belief, there's this conflict that you need to not make it about you, but at the same time, you're racist. And if you ask somebody of the other race to take the lead, that's also racist. So if you take the lead, it's racist. If they take the lead, it's racist. Therefore, if in this imaginary world where all this racism exists, it would just exist forever because everybody's frozen in fear of doing anything about it because they're afraid of being racist.
Well, no surprise. They say the fight for social justice is never ending. Again, this is all Marxist gobbledygook. And they are very obsessed, as we heard, with the notion of anti-racism. And a lot of people are not necessarily familiar with what that means. These people divide the world up just like oppressors and oppressed. They also divide it up as racists or anti-racist. There is no in between. You're either a racist, they say, or you're an anti-racist. And to qualify as an anti-racist, which I don't want to be in the racist category, I'm a decent person. To qualify as an anti-racist, you must engage in the never-ending fight for social justice. You must engage in essentially Marxist activism and decenter your whiteness. Otherwise, you're a racist. If you just simply treat everybody really well, but don't engage in social justice activism, in their definition, you are a racist. That is the worldview of the people who are teaching the next generation of psychologists in America. That is the worldview of the people who run your K-12 schools in Kentucky and your universities in Kentucky. And Louisville's bad. I think the University of Kentucky is even worse. But that is the worldview these people have, that if you simply live your life as a decent person, treat others as you would want to be treated, but don't engage in social justice activism, you are a racist. These people should never be allowed around children. They should never be allowed around vulnerable people. Instead, we're paying them to do just those things.
Now, I remember, obviously I live here in Kentucky. I report on Kentucky politics. So, I would remember it. And maybe you probably wouldn't. But 2 years ago here in Kentucky, a year ago, 2 years ago, there's quite a argument and fight over banning DEI and these anti-racism ideas of treating people differently based upon their skin color. I mean, that's how it was defined as the bill. Basically, it's illegal to treat people differently based upon their skin color. It's illegal to teach people to treat people differently based upon their skin color. It's illegal to tell people they should feel guilty or something because of their skin color. That's what the bill said. I believe it passed. It specifically targeted colleges, which is weird. It should have targeted K through 12 first, considering they're more vulnerable, and legally they kind of, in Kentucky, homeschooling somewhat is pretty easy to obtain, but still legally you have to have your kid in a K through 12 program of some sort, whether that's homeschooling, private school, or at the free, quote unquote, free public schools. You have to make that choice. So obviously defending it in K through 12, something that you're legally compelled to take your kids to, would be more important. But that's its own soapbox. Sorry, I didn't mean to get on that.
That's a great soapbox, because if this stuff isn't appropriate for seniors in college, what is it doing in kindergarten?
Right. But beyond that, we passed it first in colleges and universities. But, I didn't play it, but at the beginning of that video, these speakers are talking about these laws and about how the laws, they can get around the laws, or they're teaching in spite of the laws. And we have these laws in Kentucky. So I guess my first question is how are they able to still do this? How does Louisville have a color lab? How does Louisville have a professor that's making a presentation, probably paid for her entrance to the conference, because they probably didn't give it to her for free. But if she paid for her entrance to the conference, she paid money. Definitely people who paid money from U of L, taxpayer funds, definitely people who attended that. I guarantee you there were people from Louisville in that conference that were paid for by taxpayer funds. So if we have a law banning this in colleges and universities here in Kentucky, which we do, and we have a professor at a color lab, which shouldn't even be legally allowed to exist under the auspices of that law, then we have people paying money to attend a speech given by a Louisville professor about DEI. How is this happening, Adam?
There's two things to unpack here. One, as I've told you before, Kentucky's DEI ban isn't worth the paper it was printed on. In my opinion, as an outsider, it speaks to me as one of those laws written to get primary votes, not written to solve problems. First off, it doesn't address curriculum at all. It says, do all the DEI you want in the curriculum, knock yourself out. The excuse they give is that the accreditors require it. That is a lie. If a politician tells you that, they're either lying or uninformed, because the accreditors have made it clear that they will make allowances for compliance with state law. So when these politicians say, well, we wanted to ban it from curriculum, we really did, but the accreditors wouldn't let us off, phooey, they're lying to you or they're a fool. And second of all, what the law did ban was DEI departments and programs. Now, as we know, they just renamed the departments. They just renamed the programs. Now, they didn't rename the color lab. This woman's overtly, openly doing DEI. How's that allowed? Well, the law has no reporting mechanism. And if I remember correctly, it has no legal consequences for breaking it. How many of us would follow the speed limit to a T if we knew there was zero chance ever of us getting a ticket for breaking
even with
the
us
speed limit?
having the
Exactly.
chance to get a ticket,
Exactly.
We speed all the
Now,
time.
We know it's this woman's religion, and we know there are no penalties for breaking the law. Why in the world would you ever expect this radical to adhere to law? It's not going to happen. Now, here's the good news. We've been shouting the same thing and releasing these videos in states across the country that have DEI bans. Well, since then, North Carolina also has a Democrat governor. North Carolina fired a whole bunch of the staffers that appeared in our videos. The dean of students at UNC Asheville, she's looking for work if you know anybody hiring after she appeared in our video, about 6, I think, in total. And then North Carolina went back and passed a new DEI ban that specifically addresses curriculum, that covers K through 12 and higher ed and local governments, and you can get fines of up to $10,000 for every infraction. Kansas did a similar law. Now, if they can do that in North Carolina with the Democrat governor, there's no reason it can't be done in Kentucky.
Now, you said something there. I want to dig in a little bit more. And you talked about accreditors, and I know through talking to you that this has been, I guess, a bug in the system to a degree where you have this claim of accreditors and everything else. My first thing, correct me if I'm wrong, the state laws require these people to be accredited, correct?
I believe so.
And the state laws prescribe who can do the accrediting, correct? It's not a national thing. It's that, hey, if you want to be licensed in the state of Kentucky to be a psychologist, you have to be accredited by, and they say the group, APA or whatever it is, right?
Yes, there are two types of accreditors. This is where it gets wonky and boring, but there are institutional accreditors like that the University of Kentucky would get accreditation from. And then there are programmatic accreditors for specific degrees.
So is it not just possible for the state of Kentucky to say, look, we will accept accreditation from this group, from multiple groups, and not just surely, especially in psychology, because, I believe in psychology, there's a fair amount probably of church pastors who have to be accredited of some sort in psychology to offer some type of counseling or things like that. I know there must be Christian psychologist organization that wants to stick to being able to teach on biblical principles. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that has to exist, right?
I don't know if there are good ones or not, but what I know is that the ones that exist generally have a carve out in their accreditation rules that allow legal compliance. They don't want to have people say, we're going to ditch this accreditation body because there's a new law. They don't want to disappear as an accreditor. So they allow that carve out. And they've made it very clear from social work and other fields. illegal compliance is an excuse to get around the accreditation.
So there
All
is
you have to
more
do
than
pass
one
a law.
accreditor out there. That's the point.
Well, there's different accreditors for different fields. I don't know if there are multiple for psychology or not, but I know that generally they allow you to comply with the law.
And so, even the accreditation claim then falls flat on its face when you consider that, and legislators like, well, we have to do it, or for accreditation. It's like you're the one requiring that in the first place.
Yes.
I mean,
I love that. They pretend their hands are tied. Well, we've got to listen. Who elected the accreditors? Who's running the show here? Who's running these universities? If the elected officials and the board of governors of these universities aren't the ones ultimately responsible, who is? We turn it over to some random accreditation body? I never voted for them. I never agreed to give my funding to them. Why are they running education in these states? But thankfully, again, they do generally say that if you pass a law saying X, Y, and Z, we will no longer require that for accreditation within your state. States called their bluff and they adhered to it. Florida called their bluff and they adhered to it. Now North Carolina and Kansas have called their bluff. There's no reason Kentucky can't do the same.
And so you mentioned legal consequences for breaking the law.
Crazy idea.
Yeah, I know. It's insane. Well, they just here in Kentucky passed it. So for a long time, it was against the law to use public resources to advocate for or against a ballot question. But there was no consequences tied to it, and they tied it to specifically money. What this led to, not to get boring, but what this led to was things like, here in Kentucky, if you try to raise your school taxes over 4%, in an adjusted rate, it gets really wonky. But basically, if you try to raise effectively what you're paying in your property tax to the schools by more than 4% a year, it can become a ballot question. And schools were basically using their giant email list from all the parents that have ever attended who've had kids attend the school to make a case and to basically have an email list of all the voters within the county that they could be sending their propaganda to. And so this law was saying, no, you can't do that either. You're not allowed to use taxpayer dollars to advocate for more taxpayer dollars. Like, you can't do that, right? And then they attached some punishment to it. So this isn't unheard of in Kentucky to sit there and say, look, we passed a law saying you can't do something. We now have people doing this thing that we've passed a law about, and so we're going to have to come in and fix it. That's not crazy. That's not unheard of at all. You'd mentioned Kansas and these other places and some of the repercussions they put in place. What repercussions specifically do you want to see Kentucky legislators put into place as a consequence for people like Dr. What was her name? Dr.
Yara Mekawi. So I think the $10,000 per infraction is a good start, but I wholeheartedly believe that if you are knowingly breaking the law while doing your government-funded job, you should never be allowed to collect a paycheck from the government again, and your pension should be stripped from you. Those who are working for the taxpayers should be held to a higher standard than those who are making lattes down the street as a barista. If we entrust in you our tax dollars that we paid, we don't have direct oversight every day. We're not doing performance reports on you every quarter. So we're trusting in you that you're using our tax dollars for the job that we hired you to do. Well, if you're using them not only not to do that job, but to break the law, the punishment must be severe. Those people should be stricken from ever working from the government again. And as I said, their pension, which is going to bankrupt the state anyway, should be stripped from them.
This episode is brought to you by Claude by Anthropic. Claude is the AI for minds that don't stop at good enough. It's the collaborator that actually understands your entire workflow and thinks with you. Whether you're debugging code at midnight or strategizing your next business move, Claude extends your thinking to tackle the problems that matter and finds connections you might have missed. For problems worth solving, get started at claude.ai/Spotify.
I've been in this library for 6 hours. I'm out of snacks and energy. Plus, I just realized I forgot to put deodorant on.
Oh, girl, you're a mess. Let's run to Target.
Let's RTT.
We'll grab some protein chips, body spray, and deodorant.
And we get 20% off with Target Circle so we can get those great face masks for our self-care Sundays.
I love an SCS.
Let's get out of here.
College students get 20% off their next purchase with Target Circle. Subject to terms. Visit target.com/circle for more details.
How much was it to attend this conference? I mean, you got your undercover person there, so surely you guys paid for it, right?
We have various means of attending various types of conferences under various auspices, and costs may vary. Now, this one, if I remember correctly, I think it's like $600 or $800 to attend. It's occurring again this week. They're having this year's APA conference. And what's again astounding is I think it's so heavily supported by their big name sponsors. You know, if you look on their list, as I said, OpenAI is the highest level of sponsor, but even groups like the American Diabetes Association,
Rewind.
do they know?
What interest does AI even have in the field of psychology? I mean, shouldn't I mean, AI right now is obviously coming under fire for acting as a psychologist at times, and they're opening themselves up to all kinds of liability. I mean, I've heard Sam Bankman, whatever his name is, give a few interviews where he's certainly like, look, we need to be careful about this whole acting as a therapist thing. We're opening ourselves up to liability. What interest does AI even have in psychology to be sponsoring the psychology event, to then turn around and have this interest in DEI? It certainly makes you worried about the inputs. I mean, if that AI, OpenAI, that's Chat GPT, correct? They see, oh, I sponsored this event that then this thing was set at. Don't you think that AI might put a lot of weight into what was said at that event?
Which is why it's so incredibly terrifying. This is an influential, serious organization. As I said, a budget of about $150 million annually. So now you wonder if you're going to go to OpenAI and ask questions related to, depression. Are they going to tell you maybe the reason you're depressed is you're centering your whiteness too much? Who knows what kind of information you're going to get from it.
I'm white and depressed. And they're like, well, it's because you're a racist.
Yeah, it turns out you're an oppressor. That's why. Maybe if you engage in anti-racism, you'll be less of a racist and you'll be less depressed. And we laugh at that sort of thing, but there's an entire generation growing up now who are going to live and die based on AI. And I always look at it through the lens of, what if we had planted like chips in our brains that, put these sorts of crazy left-wing ideas into our brains day in, day out? It sounds like a horrible, horrible dystopian futuristic fantasy. Well, how is that different than putting in a few keystrokes on a computer and reading that information and having it go into your brain? I don't think it's very different at all. It's just, I guess, a convenience factor. So the notion of what people view as right and wrong being molded by these radicals who hate America, hate the vision of Martin Luther King, hate the notion of a colorblind society, hate equality, think we should strictly judge one another based on our skin color, of that being put out as the right and wrong to society is truly terrifying. But it's even worse to know that we are forced to fund it.
So, obviously the whole video is like 4 minutes long. I encourage people to go watch it. Accuracy in Media. I'll tag them if you're watching on social media. But I'm curious, sitting through that entire presentation, I'm sure you have video from the entire presentation that you watched. Do they ever explain like what specifically the therapies are to help you deal with your whiteness? Do they ever sit down and explain like, okay, here's a exercise you can do to help people deal with the moving beyond fragility?
I don't believe in this one they did, because I imagine that's more in their book. And, a communist is still a capitalist at heart. They want to sell their book to you. They want to make sure you use local government tax dollars to buy the book and put it in your K through 12 library, buy a bunch of copies for your university and put it in your university library. So I imagine you got to buy the book to read that. And don't anyone who's listening take that as an endorsement. Don't buy that book. Rarely would I encourage stealing, but maybe in the case of Beyond Fragility, I would never want to give $1 to these Marxist, racist, hateful nut jobs. So I can't see the need to buy that book. But, we did attend many other panels. And as you mentioned, we released a second video from that same conference. So what you essentially learn the more you listen to these people is that it's just like any other far left organization. Just as they've taken universities and turned them into activism factories, just as they've taken K through 12 schools and turned them into brainwashing factories to feed into the activism factories, the radicals have seized this majorly important, influential organization and turned it into just another left-wing organization. They're trying to take every cultural institution we have, and we saw it recently with the Smithsonian, which got a lot of heat recently, well-deserved. They're taking every cultural institution in America and turning it into another democratic socialist of America.
Yeah, it's certainly concerning when you do have these bodies that are essentially heavily taxpayer funding, because the people attending these, the people giving the speeches, everything else, all seem to have taxpayer funded jobs, are taking part in funding this and pushing this forward, and it does make you wonder about what's going on exactly in our universities. Well, Adam, I thank you so much for joining us. I thank you for spending some time. Real quick, plug your stuff. Where can people follow, find out more? What do you want?
Our website is aim.org, AIM.org. We're active on every social media platform. We have additional videos coming out in the next 2 weeks from the American Psychological Association conference, and also at aim.org. You can click through and send a message directly to the relevant elected officials in Kentucky and elsewhere, like at the DOJ, letting them know that your tax dollars should not fund this divisive nonsense.
Sounds good. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you for having me.